Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Now more than ever, independent media needs the support of listeners and viewers. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find out how to support the podcast, gain access to bonus content. Our guest today is Tom Luongo, and we continue and update our conversation from episode 229, Central Bank Wars, about the financial war underlying conflicts and crises around the world right now. We discuss the global financial infrastructure, Libor, and its replacement, SOFR, the Federal Reserve, the great power wars, the hot war in Ukraine, and more. In a long bonus episode, we talk about whether Russia and China are part of the Great Reset and in on it, so to speak, taking into consideration some arguments from both sides of that question, which has been a very hot question lately. Tom Luongo is a former research chemist, an amateur dairy goat farmer, an anarcho-libertarian, and an obstreperous Austrian economist. His specialty is connecting geopolitics and finance or investment, and he publishes the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter and podcast, and his work can be found on sites like Zerohedge, Lou Rockwell, Bitcoin Magazine, and Newsmax. We recorded this on March 31st, 2022. Tom Luongo's here talking to us from Florida. Hello, Tom. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. It's great to see you again.
Sorry. Absolutely, Joanne. That's my pleasure, as always.
So, you have been busy, and I've caught a lot of different of your own shows and appearances on others. You're basically blowing up. So, and also then you've got the articles, and then they're running on Zerohedge, and then those blow up. I want to go back to July of last year, last summer. The last time we talked in this podcast, that's linked in the, if you guys didn't catch that, you want to, listen to that, go ahead and do that, because that's a preface for this episode. And we talked about the central bank wars, just to boil it down to a very simplistic term.
Yep.
Now they continue. From what I can tell, your theory has not changed. It's just, as things, of course, war is an evolving thing, right? Things happen, things change.
Yep.
And now we have a hot war, one hell of a hot war to go along with it, that is perhaps budding into a world war, which would be, as I've argued, basically since like 2015, there are clearly some people who want a world war.
Yep.
And what happened in the last world war, people were able to sort of redesign the global order, the economy, really reshuffle it, do it in a fairly short period of time, maybe something that's not possible at all without something as disruptive as a world war.
Right.
And I'm afraid that is where we are heading again. I mean, plenty of people have told us that the world order is going to change, everything's going to change, that we have a new normal, and there are 1,000 different ways where this has been signaled by very high level powers, or people at least who consider themselves to be very high level powers, with the authority to redesign our world, which just blows my mind to begin with. But so let's talk about that theory. Basically, if we talk about it from a central bank standpoint, it's the ECB versus the Fed.
At a minimum.
And
yes.
The Bank of England falls with the Fed, would you say?
No.
Or has that changed? Where are they?
Not really ever. They were never really. The Bank of England is always been on the Bank of England side, right?
Yeah.
So to go back, what I've been arguing is that the Federal Reserve and the commercial banking interests in the United States are not down with the Great Reset, because the Great Reset whole idea coming out of Davos is that we're going to transfer power of money transmission from the commercial banking sector directly to the central banks. We currently have a two-tiered system where the central banks and the treasury and the local treasury departments create money to then base money, which then the commercial banks then lend into the world. And those are two separate systems, right? And they intersect
with some autonomy.
Yeah, and they mostly have autonomy from each other, but they connect at the primary dealer level, where the primary dealers buy the debt and ensure that the whole system stays liquefied. But you don't go directly to the Fed to get a loan for your house, for your mortgage. You go to JP Morgan. JP Morgan will quote you a rate, and then JP Morgan goes to the Fed to get the money to lend you to buy the house, to pay off the buyer, and then you're stuck with the mortgage, which is what you asked for. That system they want to collapse. They want to get rid of the commercial banks and transfer all that power directly to the central banks through the central bank digital currency of one form or another, where if you need to get a loan, you have to go to the central bank to get it. They'll do away with cash. Everything will be under a global tax ID and surveillance and biometric scans and all the rest of the stuff that this old fourth industrial revolution thing they want to do. Fine. That's what they want to do. That's their goal, because they know that they can't continue to run this system, which is based on issuing debt as the asset, the reserve asset to issue the currency. They've been making a lot of money off that debt, because what they do with the interest on that debt and the VIG, and I'm using that term correctly for every critic who's told me that that's mafia stuff. I'm like, yes, it's government, it's mafia stuff. It's a VIG. The interest rate on creating freshly minted scrip is a VIG. Gone. Now, that really sucks up most of the real profit on any investment. Okay. For the most part, we are not more than 1% to 2% in real terms profitable on an annual basis. There's about 1% to 2% real, honest to God, wealth that is generated and saved over the cost of goods and in the aggregate, in the history of humanity. And so if they're taking 3% and 4%, then you can understand why if they take all of that, take 90% of that or 95% of that real wealth that's generated, ignore nominal interest rates, just understand it in those terms. If you're 2%, if you can, grow your capital base by 2% a year, but in order to grow that by 2% a year, you have to pay 1.85% to the money masters, right? Well, then you get nothing and you never grow. You're growing at this rate and they're growing at this rate, which is the source of the wealth equality that everybody to the left of me complains about, and rightly so. Okay, so now that system is failing. You can't do that forever, because eventually you can't issue any more debt to the point where people will go, hey, look, you're never going to pay this back. And the interest rates you're paying me don't in no way offset the risks. You can't obfuscate that VIG anymore with nominal interest rates. We've now interest rates at zero. You get nothing for holding your money in reserve. You got in savings. You don't get paid on your savings anymore. You need something else to get you there. So to get something, so they've moved people into stocks and they've moved people into cryptos, not Bitcoin, but other cryptos. That's where they're trying to move everybody into, to get these outrageous returns on their money while the capital base falls. It's crazy. So that's the impetus for all this. And they saw this coming because they can do the math. They're not dumb. They're very smart people. So at some point, the system is going to fail. And when the system fails, they're going to have to give you a new system. But they want to stay in power.
Exactly.
So how are they going to pull this off and stay in power? By collapsing the commercial banking system and transferring everything to the central banks, which they control. And then after they've collapsed all the central banks, collapse all the central banks into one central bank, the BIS or the IMF, or them together, with the UN as the world's police force and governing body. That's their goal. And the structure of all that will be will look an awful lot like the unelected technocracy of the European Union. Now that you have the landscape, now understand who owns the Fed, who controls the Fed, and why would they not want to go along with this?
Well, tell people who don't know that.
I am. That's why I'm trying to do this in order. So now catch up. Now, the Fed is made up of 12 regional banks, right? The most powerful of which is New York. just like California is the most powerful state in the United States, just like Germany is the most powerful country in the European Union, just like Moscow is the most important, most powerful oblast in Russia, right? Who controls the New York Fed? The shareholders of the New York Fed. Who are the shareholders in New York Fed? Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BofA, Morgan Stanley, blah, 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 blah. All the primary dealer money center banks that we all love to hate. Now I'm going to ask you a very simple question, because 95% of what I do is to ask very simple questions about who benefits. So who benefits? Do these guys benefit if the New York Fed becomes subordinate to the European Central Bank and then the IMF? If you collapse their businesses? No.
Not unless some other role that we haven't thought of has been carved out for them. No.
Fair. That's a fair. Now think about that. I thought about those. They don't exist. Okay. What they want to do, what we've done with zero bound interest rates is we've destroyed their basic operational means of making money, meaning net interest margin. They borrow money from the Fed at 2%. They lend it out at 6%. They take their 4% vig. They do their thing. And then the investors in the bank, get paid 4%. They borrow from the Fed at 2%. They give you 4% on savings. They lend it out at 6 or 8 or whatever, depending on the risk of the investment. You get paid part of the, and that's the way banking is supposed to work. That's the way regional banking works still. It's the way really basic basic banking works. They can't do that when net interest margins are almost zero. Yeah. And that process is called net interest margin. That's supposed to be 95% of the bank's profit. That's where the bank makes their money traditionally. That's gone. Since Lehman Brothers, they don't make anything in net interest margin. So where do they make money? They make money in the investment banking side. Yeah. They make money in the fees and the book running and the running hedge funds and all the rest of it. That's where they make their money. That's why they like crypto, because it's the next way to a set of products that they can sell to get fees for transaction fees, where they just want the transaction fees because that's the only way they make money anymore. Okay. So, and that's because of the system. Now, if you collapse this system and put the bonus, take the power away from the central banks, give it back to the commercial banks. So the central bank doesn't control the commercial banks. Then the commercial banks have the Fed as a backstop, like it was originally designed to be. Not that I'm, as an Austrian and as a libertarian, I'm fundamentally opposed to all this stuff. But but Martin Armstrong makes the argument that if we had done this, if we had kept the Fed as it was originally designed, it would be a far better institution than it is today. Because we'd have 12 regional interest rates around the country. We'd have, they would provide elastic money when there was a localized problem, and and then it would be distinguished and that would extinguish, and that would be that. When it became a politicized arm of the U.S. Treasury to liquefy the world with trade dollars, well, it's a different institution entirely. So now the question is the Federal Reserve down with destroying the people who actually own it? Is the FOMC, and the members of the FOMC are appointed by Congress, and guess who tells them who to appoint? The big money center banks. Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense at all that they would vote for their own extinction. Yeah. Under Klaus Schwab's desire for global communism via an unelected technocracy. I just don't see Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan. I say this all the time. I just don't see that disagreeable Greek guy turning over his JP Morgan Chase, the most powerful bank in the world, to a German eugenicist. I just don't see it. I mean, just the enmity between Greeks and Germans alone would preclude this. I mean, just the literal enmity between Dimon, who's a Greek, and Schwab, who's a Nazi. Like, I just don't buy it. Like, it's fundamentally, I just don't buy it. And so now let's think about this. So what steps of the Fed do I think the Fed has taken to get themselves out from underneath this particular problem, this burden? I think it started actually with them telling Trump to nominate Powell. That it actually, the fight started well before I even identified it. But I identified it in the summer when the Fed very stealthily raised payout rates on reverse repos by 5 basis points, which collapsed the overseas dollar markets. The euro dropped 3% overnight. The reverse repo facility balance went from 450 billion to 1.7 trillion, like in 3 months. It was crazy. Dogs and cats living together, the mass hysteria. But the big issue was that it drained the overseas dollar markets. And it did so in 2021. And I kept saying to myself, how is the Fed going to do this? And what's the catalyst for them to be able to enforce this new chutzpah? Because they've always had the reverse policy whenever they've raised rates in the past. Fed raises rates a little bit, the markets start to freak out, the Fed lowers rates back to zero. So aside from if you don't even buy my thesis, that's fine. I've written and discussed this extensively, and most of what I wrote about in June and July of last year, if you go back to those podcasts and the blog posts I wrote about this to try and catch you up to speed. And if you don't understand why this very technical little move on the reverse repo rates would have the ability to do that, I explain it. It would take me another 2 hours to explain.
So I have those linked here in the show notes, 75 and 76, the Davos in the week.
76, 75 through 77. Yeah.
Oh, all right. I'll add 77.
77 helped kind of ties it all together, but 75 is where I explain the Fed.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That's
so people, those links are in the show notes for you.
And they're short. They're like 35 minutes. It's just me ranting into a microphone. There's no guest. And then there's the blog post from July. You can go to my blog at tomluongo.me and you can find the blog post that I wrote about, because I wrote about this like crazy for weeks trying to explain it. I was the only person thinking about in these terms.
Yes.
By the way, I've had market professionals to come to me since then, become patrons, and behind the scenes, oh yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'm a witness to this. I watched it unfold. I saw. I was following the whole time. Yeah.
So when the Fed did this, it immediately sparked a firestorm on Capitol Hill to try and overthrow Powell. That's what the insider trading scandal last summer was.
He's still not confirmed, right?
No, he's still not confirmed because they've got to confirm the replacements for Kaplan, Rosengren, and Kurita, the three governors that got axed. And Biden and Obama keep putting up open commies, and then the Senate keeps saying no.
Even though I could agree with that.
Right. And so where we are is we're in this mode where the Fed, the FOMC has elected, has said that Powell can be chair pro tem until he's confirmed. There's plenty of precedent for this. Greenspan went through one of these, 6 months,
really?
8 months worth of, where he was unconfirmed for 8 months, but he was still Fed chairman. So this is nothing. This has happened before. When the Fed tries to get uppity and goes against Davos, then they try not to confirm the Fed chair until the Fed chair knuckles under. So they keep playing this game. And the way they play the game on Capitol Hill is to put pressure the Fed with the fiscal spending, because if you get through this $5.5 trillion budget and another $6 trillion Build Back Better bill, and there's no appetite for $11 trillion worth of debt overseas to fund this, then the Fed has to monetize it, and the Fed can't raise interest rates. So think of those bills as just basic everyday blackmail. That's all they are. Okay. They're all they are. Yeah. And so it was very clear to me last year watching Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Obviously, JP Morgan was standing behind them going, under no circumstances do you vote for these bills, and don't worry about it. No, in no way are they going to kill your wife and daughter. So in the case of like Joe Manchin, like, we've got this covered. You stand your ground. Pelosi and Schumer can go hang. And they're not going to be sending CIA hitmen to your house to kidnap your wife and daughter. Or in the case of Kirsten Sinema, whoever she's, because I don't even know what her status is, but I know she's like, gender fluid or whatever. So my point being is that was clearly on the table, because Manchin should have shown up to Congress one day, so the Senate one day with a big black eye.
Right.
And then eventually
like Harry
Reid, Mitch McConnell, John Roberts, you name it. We've seen this half a dozen times. Right. So, what happened? I fell down.
They showed up.
They went after, they got McConnell. They got John Roberts.
They beat them up and it was visible.
Yeah, no, John Roberts showed up to court over Obamacare.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The Harry Reid thing is the most famous one, but they got McConnell last year.
I'll have to ask.
They sent a large Mexican to his house, to beat him up or whatever, So you understand that this is the game that's being played. Okay. So once you understand that, now you got to ask yourself the question, that's nice, Tom, but how does the Fed actually enforce this? When you understand, really go into the guts and the depth of the plumbing of the financial system, which I will admit freely, I am not an expert in. I am a layman plus in. Okay. So I look at things from the layman plus level and understand things just well enough to understand everybody's motivations. And then I wait, and then I put things out there and wait for the professionals to come to me and tell me whether I'm, full of it or not. And every time I do this, the professionals come back to me and go, "Oh no, you're absolutely right." Right. And I'm getting more of that more every day.
Got it.
So, and then they give me the little details that I'm missing. And I'm like, "Oh, yes, thank you." And then I get to write about that without attributing them. But I've had many a market professional.
So this has become a little bit of a brainstorming.
Oh, it's always a brainstorming thing. Like the whole thing of what
that's always the best. That's the best.
Yeah. What I do, Joanne, is I look at the data in front of me and I go, well, that norms out to this thesis. Let's put that out in public and see what it does. I don't necessarily agree with it, but let's play with it. I may be wrong, but I have no fear of being wrong, because if I put it out there,
you've got the science, you've got the scientific mind, which I relate to.
Right.
Yeah. And there, I don't know whether it's an interesting mix. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
So no, I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. It's you test hypotheses. Like that's what we do. And by the way, I kind of do that kind of hypotheses testing when I put these ideas out there, because I know the people, I know their motivations, I know their allegiances. And now I just kind of like, okay, well, those three differential equations sum to this. Let's put that out there and see what it looks like. Right. And I've been wrong many times, but about this, I haven't been wrong, because I've got the fundamental economics are correct. Austrian economics is fundamentally correct, okay, about how the world actually works, because it's built upon the ruthless application of the law of diminishing marginal utility. And once you understand that and take that into your head and submit to it, the way Christians submit to God, if you submit to all of our behavior is built around the law of diminishing marginal utility, which is true, by the way, then everything else becomes really, really clear, which is basically saying that, look, every time you acquire the next unit of a thing, it's worth less to you than the previous one. So when you're starving, that first bit of food is the most important to you. The second bit of food, not so much. It's important, but not as much. And eventually, if you have more food, you throw up, you drown, like you don't need more food. You've got too much. So, and then now it's worthless to you. And that's what causes that's where supply and demand comes from. It's where everything comes from, where human behavior ultimately is motivated by the application and the satisfaction of needs and wants.
I'll add some charts from my old economics book. I vaguely remember that stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really quite simple. And I try to keep it very, very simple, because it explains monetary theory, it explains interest rate theory, it explains all this stuff. It's very, very simple. It explains the subjective theory of value of Karl Menger. It explains all this crap. So, in a nice, like tight, encapsulated way for you to go to 2 pages of Investopedia and understand it. And then just start rigorously applying it to your own behavior. And you'll go, oh yeah, Tom makes perfect sense. And then all these other people are lying to you, because they're trying to make it more complicated than it actually is.
Well, they're grifting too. A lot of them. It's all about
exactly. It's all about.
I worked on Wall Street in the 90s, so there are a lot of really smart people, but there are also a lot of grifters.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with their advice and their letters and their research feeds and this kind of stuff. Yeah,
that was the one thing when I first got into the newsletter writing business. When I first went to work for Newsmax, I the first thing I did was I had to work with my editors and say, look, I understand you're going to teach me how to write a financial newsletter, what the language is and the structure of it and stuff. And that's fine. It's a skill, and I'm happy to learn that. But I'm going to be me.
Yeah.
To the nth degree. And I remember I'll always remember the interview, the phone interview, where the woman who became my editor for the first year and a half I was there, she asked me the basic questions. She's like, what do you do when you make a mistake? What happens when you fail and you make a bad prediction? Do you own it, or do you try and cover it up? I'm like, no, you own it and you move on.
Always own it. Yeah.
Always own it. And just say, just look, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I hate to make mistakes. I'm terrible. Why do you, this is
Nobody
why I'm as detailed as no one likes to make
all the time. No one ever. Whoever does, then you don't want them as a customer. So,
Yeah, sometimes you have to just fire 10% of your customers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of grifters.
It's like the key to business.
There's also some great, people with integrity and brilliant and all that stuff. You just have to sort through, the wheat and the chaff with it.
Absolutely. So I finally uncovered the catalyst. I was chatting with a patron and he put some ideas in my head. And I'm like, huh. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what you're saying. So we all know about Libor, right? The London interbank overnight.
Well, no, a lot of us do not, right?
Okay, so I'm going to explain.
Most people in the world have no idea what.
Right, don't know anything about it. I know you used to work on Wall Street. You know all about Libor. And you know that, and most people, if they know anything about Libor, they remember the 2008 Barclays Libor scandal, where they were fixing the rates, but they don't understand why that was
ago already. Wow.
So just like Lehman Brothers was 14 years ago, and I had black hair back then, and and my daughter was an infant. Like it's like now she's gonna learn how to drive. It's just insane. So now we're at this. So Libor is the interbank offer rate, which is it's the rate that banks use to lend money to each other on a day-to-day basis. And when they need a little bit of like bank A has some payroll due and they're caught a little short. So they go to bank B and say, give me an overnight loan for $10,000. I'll pay you back tomorrow. Charge me 5 basis points or whatever the Libor rate is for the overnight rate. And I'll pay that. Oh, hey, I'll give you Libor plus 5 basis points today because I really need the money.
Let me just interject real quick. 100 basis points is 1%.
Right. 100 basis points is 1%. Yeah. Sorry. Or I really need the money. I'll give you a Libor plus 200 basis points. And so when you watch the Libor rate blow out, it's a measure of stress, especially short term. The shorter the term, the blowout in a rate is, in a money market rate like that, the more stress there is on the system at that moment in time. Right. So if the overnight rate balloons from, 0.5% today and then tomorrow goes to 6%, somebody's about to go bankrupt. That's what that means, because they're willing to buy overnight money at 6% in order to cover, Vinny the leg breaker, who's going to show up at their door and say, you need to pay me.
Oh my God. Yeah. Bad situation.
So trying to make this as graphic and as colorful as possible for people to understand what is usually dry and boring. But that's really what it comes down to. Vinny the leg breaker is going to show up tomorrow and wants his money, because wants his money. Well, you got to go get the money. So you go and you borrow from Bank B at 26% for 2 days, and you give Vinny the leg breaker his money. He leaves, and then you got to go figure out how you're going to get the money that you paid. So that's what you do. And so if it goes up and spikes and then goes back down again, well, again, that's not a big deal. Somebody almost went bankrupt. If it goes up and stays up, that's a systemic stress on the system. If it goes up slowly and it keeps rising every day, that's the building up of stresses as more and more people are getting visited by multiple Vinny the leg breakers, right? So now that's Libor. Libor is set by 18 member banks at the end of every business day. It is not a market rate.
That's the shocking thing. And isn't it like by phone or something? Don't they just
they all just get on, they got on the red phone together and they talk about it and they all decide on what it's going to be. Only one of those banks is a US bank, JP Morgan's London office. All the rest are in City of London or in Europe. Why? Old European banks, because that was who the Libor board was.
Why do we go along with this?
That's a good question. Why? Because they've always considered us the colonies, and Britain has never actually ever relinquished control of the United States. That's the rabbit hole I'll send you down. That I agree with completely. If we're betrayed by anybody, it's our closest ally.
Frenemies.
The people who have been undermining the United States since the day after the revolution. The War of 1812, they were back in the South in 1860 while Russia was backing the Union. I mean, and they're still angry with the Russians for back in Lincoln. Like, these people are crazy. The Brits are.
Well, I think that's where
thank God for Monty Python, but that's not enough, dude. You've destroyed the world. So understand that the 17 of the 18 banks in Libor do not have the U.S.'s best interest at heart. They don't give a damn about the U.S.
Say that again. Say again.
17 of the 18 LIBOR banks do not represent U.S. interests.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
And they're not
One
friends.
of them does. It's the most powerful, and it's JP Morgan Chase, but it's just one.
I didn't realize JP Morgan was the only one on that.
Yeah, I looked at the list the other day. I looked at the list and I was like, I blanched when I saw that, right? So,
but I did always wonder why JP Morgan seemed elevated.
JP Morgan has to be involved in because
power.
they're very involved with the London Bullion Metals Exchange in order to facilitate the gold trade. Okay, so now think LIBOR. So what happens when the Fed raises interest rates here in the United States because they need to, because we've got inflation or full employment or whatever, what happens? It puts stress on the overseas dollar markets and drains the overseas markets of dollars. The Fed raises rates, it drains dollars because rates go up. And so what does that do? Well, there's this thing called the euro dollar market, which is a misnomer because it's really just offshore dollars.
Yeah,
call them euro dollars.
Totally new to me. Yeah.
Okay. So now we have the euro dollar markets. There's a thing you can go look up. It's called the euro dollar futures curve. People will trade futures contracts against offshore dollars, and it gets very complicated. But just understand that there's a very smart guy over at Lombard Partners called Jeff Snyder, who's taught me and many in this space that the euro dollar system is actually the setter of monetary policy, not the Federal Reserve.
Our monetary policy as well.
Our monetary policy is set by offshore banks who have more capacity to issue dollars than the Federal Reserve does because there's all these dollars sitting in reserves in foreign central banks and foreign commercial banks.
God.
Now think now, and they get to set the interest rate on that debt. So if the Fed drains the euro dollar markets by raising rates, right, then LIBOR blows out disproportionately. We raise by a point, LIBOR blows out by 4 points. If all of the U.S. debt in the United States is indexed to LIBOR, even though that debt's not under stress from the 1 point rate hike here in the United States, it gets transferred to your mortgage that's pegged to LIBOR +2. So when the Fed raises interest rates and the bankrupt European banks start going bankrupt, LIBOR blows out and forces credit markets in the United States to seize up disproportionately or proportionately to the way they blow up, which then forces the Fed to back off and have to lower rates again. That's mechanistically what the Fed put under the market actually is. So now I'm setting all this up for the big turn. The catalyst for my thesis as to why the Fed thinks it can get away with raising rates and cutting off and cutting the European Central Bank off at the knees and the European banks off at the knees is because we don't index any of our debt to LIBOR anymore. SOFR, the Secured Overnight Funding Rate, is a domestic version of LIBOR that's a market rate set by that's designed around all the market transactions between all the Fed member central banks here in the United States, the regional banks and the national banks. Okay. SOFR is how, as of January 1st of this year, all new debt in the United States is indexed to SOFR, not to LIBOR. And there's very little, and over the 4-year rollout period of SOFR, most of the debt in the United States has been re-indexed, even the legacy debt has been re-indexed to SOFR.
Can I stop you for a minute there?
Sure.
Is that change that was made, well, not too long ago, and then the Bank of England said something like, yeah, we're not doing that, or was that something different?
That was Basel III. That was the Basel III bank. That was the Basel III rules. They play into this, but let's just keep this simple. If I start going into Basel III, which is we're way too in the weeds.
I mean, who did this?
Let's just focus on this one. This one
Who made the new rule? Who made the new rule?
We did.
SOFR?
The SOFR was brought in when John Williams was brought onto the Federal Reserve Board, and along with Jerome Powell, we wanted to do SOFR for a decade. The Fed was trying to get SOFR done for a decade, but the Treasury Department and the Obama administration wouldn't let it happen. Why? Because Obama is Davos and works for Europe and the commies in Europe. He's a traitor.
So
I'm dead serious when I say this.
So
I'm not even like getting emotional about this. I look emotional, but I'm like, no, dude, you just need to understand. This is where Obama's betrayal of the United States is most deep. He allowed Geithner and Bernanke and Yellen and whoever else his Treasury Secretary was, because I don't remember if Geithner was there the entire time. I can't remember Rubin or whoever else it was. Every one of them delayed SOFR for years. And I'll tell you that putting John Williams on the Federal Reserve Board was fought bitterly because he was the guy who had designed SOFR and he was the one who was going to implement it. And he is the one who did spearhead it and did implement it. And it was Powell, under Powell's direction, that it was done.
And what year went under?
That Trump started in 2017, 2018.
Oh.
And so they finally got, and so SOFR started to go into effect in late 2017. And then it was staged rollout of it. And it basically was used to index debt in different markets and just to test it, to see if it worked as a market rate and see if people would use it and blah, blah. And they did, because it was a product that the United States credit markets was desperate for. So here's your free market mechanisms explaining to you that LIBOR, garbage, destroying and hollowing out our credit markets and our property markets and our ability to handle capital and provide business loans to honest entrepreneurs here in the United States, subject to the whims and of a bunch of sclerotic, inbred Euro trash who have this entitled position that they think they have the right to run the world. We're talking about the Rothschilds and all those old banks. And that's why the system existed. City of London, all that. That's the real quote unquote conspiracy. It's all tied to LIBOR. Removing SOFR now allows the Federal Reserve to get as hawkish as they want, because credit spreads here in the United States are not going to blow out, but LIBOR is going to blow out. And we're going to be sitting over here going, your interest, your mortgage rate, your variable rate mortgage may go up by a point and a half, indexed to whatever the Fed does, right? If the Fed raises by 2% by the end of the year, your rate would, go from you're paying 4% on your 30-year mortgage to 6%, which would suck. But in times past, that variable rate mortgage would have gone from 4% to 18% because LIBOR would have blown sky high to keep Intesa Sao Paulo or Unicredit or BBVA or Santander from blowing up. That's the point. And that's why every previous banking crisis always started with the failure of some stupid European regional bank. And they've been forcing the Fed to monetize and liquefy their system for the last 3 years. Powell's been trying to drain the Eurodollar market since 2018. I'm firmly convinced at this point that they unleashed COVID on the world to force the Fed to monetize $12 trillion worth of debt in order to stop this conversion to SOFR. In order to try and finally destroy the Fed's credibility, destroy the dollar and everything else, in order to keep the capital from flying out of Europe, because this is all about capital flight. It's all about keeping confidence in regional economic blocs. China, Russia, the EU, the US, nominally Africa and South America, but they don't really count because they're not allowed to count because we have a neo-colonial financial system that keeps them, below
subordinate,
below subsistence level while we extract all their mineral wealth at, pennies on the dollar, right?
Yeah.
It's evil. It's vile. The system needs to go away. And what I've just described is the mechanism by which the Fed can actually get us out from underneath it, all by doing one thing and one thing alone, protecting its own interests. So it makes sense from an interest perspective. They're not doing it for our benefit. They're doing it for their own benefit. To save
our interests happen to align with theirs.
Our interests happen to align. It's not that the Fed's the good guy. They just happen to be our guy right now. It's like he's not Mr. Right. He's just Mr. Right now.
Yeah. Well, and more generally, a more nationalist perspective, right?
Right.
Versus...
And the same thing that Putin's doing over in Russia. The Fed is trying to renationalize monetary policy and then take the open blank checkbook away from Congress, because the net result in this entire system is that between that and Congress having a blank check to deficit spend, forcing the Fed to constantly having to monetize. So these are both blackmail. These are the levers of blackmail. You've got the fiscal policy from the profligate spending on Capitol Hill, and then the weakness of the European banks and LIBOR, tying the Fed's hands, and they've got no room to maneuver. Now, I'm not saying that the Fed has an easy path out of this, but what we have is the blueprint for a return of Volcker and Reagan. for the Fed to start aggressively raising interest rates into high inflation for a certain period of time, which will allow for a populist presidential candidate to come out of the weeds, be it from the left or the right. It doesn't matter if it's Tulsi Gabbard or Ron DeSantis. It doesn't matter. For somebody to come in and go, we need to get our fiscal house in order. We need to reform entitlements. We need to do this. We need to do that. Exactly the way Reagan ran in 1976 and 1980. And what I actually handicap for 2024, if the midterms lay out the way I think they're going to lay out, if the voter fraud, if they don't, cancel the elections because, there's a world war going on, that's what they're going to do. Like, let's start thinking about what their next escalations are. But if none of those things come to pass and everything kind of stays within the current bounds of political, the boundaries, right? We're going to have elections in the fall. We're going to have a presidential election in 2 years. The Republicans are going to take between 50 and 70 seats in the House, possibly more. They're going to take 3 to 5 seats in the Senate. Joe Biden will be impeached as he will be impeached. Donald Trump will become Speaker of the House. They'll impeach Biden. That theory. I still have that theory. They were talking about it the other day. Matt Gaetz and Devin Nunes both put that out there in the world the other day, saying, I'm dead serious. They're serious about that. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Trump wants it. I think they just like using the Trump boogeyman to keep the Democrats in Davos focused on him. But he's not. He's just a smokescreen. I don't see Trump as important. But somebody qualified, the Speaker of the House, to come in. I mean, nothing would drive them more apoplectic.
Someone who will do it,
who will actually who understands the rules and the mechanisms of the House and the Senate to get this done.
Of course, these guys say these things and, to get elected and to be popular again, and then they don't do shit. So,
because they're bought and paid for, because understand that before they were even allowed to run and even allowed to be in a position to win, Epstein had a black book on them. Like, it's not hard. Okay. So why is Rubio such a mouth breathing neocon?
He doesn't.
Why
really
is Lindsey Graham? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that they believe in anything.
Well, it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, it is a blackmail based, and if not blackmail, then coercion and threats. Whatever.
Coercion, threats, blackmail, you name it. And so that system is terminally corrupt. And I'm not saying that we have any hope of getting out of it, but we have but you can see the mechanisms by which people will try to get out of it, and we're seeing some of that. And then now start thinking about the potential counter moves from the people who are terminally corrupt, who don't want to see that happen. What's their way out of this? Take us to World War III.
Exactly. So let's shift a little bit.
Sure.
Oh, I've already taken a lot of your time.
It's okay. Okay, we're good. This is really complicated stuff, Joanne. This is not, I did the best I could to make it as tight as possible, because I've done this presentation so many times now. I can really, right. I can, I don't have to, I'm not getting lost. I literally told you the streamlined version of this. So It's okay. We keep going. This is important stuff.
Yeah. So, in order to reshuffle everything and arrange it the way they want, I don't know, what do we call them? We could call them World Economic Davos.
I like Davos.
Yeah. When really we know that's just a symbolic thing, but
it is.
So now we're and they were the ones all along who wanted a world war. I mean, there are other people who are going to benefit. And they wanted the undermining of the United States to get it done. Yes, exactly. Well, that's been in the works for 30 years at least.
It's been in the works, honestly, since, like I said, the Brits have been trying to undo the United States since the day after they, Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown or whatever. So
but that's different, because they then found ways to work in concert and get a lot of things they couldn't get done due to limitations.
They help create. Look, they like the Brits own the CIA. They own, the State Department. Like, it's crazy how bad the infiltration is there. So what's this? I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I just don't. It's so very obvious what's going on. Like, everything bad over the last 6 years has come from MI6.
Well, it's interesting because
everything Skripal, MH17, the Steele dossier, everything starts with something of a British agent doing something he's not supposed to do, passing a document to some U.S. senator, or it all goes through British intelligence.
Well, in alliance with people here,
Oh,
like
sure.
John Brennan is a great friend of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a whole speech that as soon as he left office, I should say, as soon as he resigned, he was openly one. Whether that was that was just a ploy or whether that was a real thing, I don't know.
He's the commie. He's a true believer.
He got some kind of award overseas. That was in some venue, and he gave this speech, which I saw, not in real time, but I saw it soon after it happened, because I was following that guy because I thought he was at the center of Rushgate.
Sure.
But and then it was a crazy speech. After that, I actually thought he might have political aspirations and might want to run for president. He's like the last person who should ever.
Yeah, he's not electable.
No.
He's barely, he's barely fit for human
disappeared.
consumption on TV. Like,
I know.
As a commentator.
I can't find that speech anywhere. I can only find little remnants of it in some strange format. It's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, Brennan is he's a piece of work. He's a piece of work.
Yeah. And he's not just one man, right? There's a whole faction around him. Yeah. Anyway, so I forgot my question. Anyway, so world war potential here.
Yeah. And so when you think about this, the whole war in Ukraine is, of course, ridiculously avoidable. Acknowledge the fact that Crimea is Russia. Acknowledge the Donbass republics are independent. Say you're not going to put, sign a treaty saying no Ukraine in NATO, no Ukraine in the EU, blah, blah, blah. This is not hard stuff. This is like us arguing over, like, signing a whole bunch of stuff about Mexico, right? Yeah. Hey, Russia, you're not going to take over Mexico. Okay. You're not going to, this is not hard, but okay. In order for, but it's like, it's just silly. There was a way out of this. Now ask yourself why it didn't happen. It didn't happen because they need this war. The neocons need it for ideological reasons to stay relevant within U.S. foreign policy circles, and because they're inherently racist. And I make that statement, and that's actually the least interesting part of their problem, but they are inherently racist. Aside from the fact that, like, Victoria Nuland is, Ukrainian, oh, by the way, and her family history and her family story, which I only just started to crack the surface of, is ridiculous. So it's obvious why she is the way she is. Again, goes back to the Brits constantly trying to figure out ways to undermine the Russians. But this gets down to, you don't have a great reset if you don't have control of Russia. And I'm sorry, but I can't even entertain ideas that that Russia's like complicit in this and they're inviting a world war, and that the war in Ukraine is fake or anything like that. That's just not the case.
Save that part for the bonus question.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's hard to
I understand.
Start this just to understand for everybody else. It's like, so the Russians, without the Russians, you can't take down China. So you have to break up Russia and China.
Yeah.
And the way you break up Russia and China, of course, is to get rid of Putin and get him into a conflict that they think they can control the terms of. And what they're thinking is, we'll turn Ukraine into Afghanistan, and we'll turn the Ukrainian army into the Mujahideen. Same playbook. They're not tough. These people aren't that clever.
It's pretty
They're somewhat
lame.
smart.
Yeah,
they're not that clever. They do the same things over and over again. So it's what they've tried to do in Syria. It's what they've done. We've done in Iraq.
As if nobody ever learned from that, and they're going to do the same thing again.
It's like nobody ever learned from the fact that the last 4 color revolutions have all failed.
Yeah.
Okay, Belarus failed, Kazakhstan failed, Syria failed, Russia failed. Yeah. The United States has mostly succeeded. That's the only one that's actually mostly succeeded. The Purple Revolution in the United States, that's mostly succeeded.
Flip back home, yeah.
Yeah. All the other ones have failed. Like, it's just crazy. So, and so especially Belarus and Kazakhstan. So there's only one place for them to try and wage war, because both, Belarus is now part of the Union State with Russia. Kazakhstan soon will be, especially with Tokayev and Kazakhstan now consolidating power now that they've gotten rid of Nazarbayev, who never really gave up power. And that's a whole tangent, but I'm sure you've covered it with other people. So what's left is Ukraine. And Ukraine is a hotbed for multiple vectors of corruption, for money laundering,
trafficking state,
data trafficking, human trafficking. 30% of the kiddie porn in the world comes from Ukraine.
That
Blah.
That Odessa area for physical goods,
yeah. It's terrible. It's just awful.
Yeah.
It's just an awful mafia thing. I bring back the VIG thing. It's just a mafia state, right? And we've encouraged that. In the same way that we encourage the breakdown of society in the former Yugoslavia and Albania, blah, 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 turn these things all into just the worst, some of the worst places in the world. And, who has their hands in all this? The Clintons, and other people. And in this case, Pelosi and Biden and everybody else. But, the Russians keep teasing us very James O'Keefe-like with information about what they found in these biolabs, right? And I see a very sincere pattern with them doing the James O'Keefe thing. We'll drip some of this out, deny that. Oh, by the way, you're guilty here.
I see.
Deny that, and then that, and then that. Drip. Like, it's the old Andrew Breitbart James O'Keefe thing, is to get your opponent to drip out 5% of your information, watch them respond to it, and deny it, and then you put out and then you have the damning evidence for the denial because you already know what's coming. Then you put that out, and then you keep backing them up. And then you keep backing them into a corner, which eventually destroys them. Now, in our case, we have a media that's so complicit in the cartoonery that like nobody ever goes to jail, right? Because we don't have a functioning media. But whatever, it ultimately doesn't matter. What the Russians are doing,
really a partisan thing anymore either.
No, it's not. This is not a partisan
versus
This is the people versus. This is the elites versus the people. That's always been the case. Republican and Democrat do not really matter, just like labor and conservative really do not matter.
Nope.
They matter somewhat in that their structures are set up in such a way that certain populist elements are more probable, I'll be honest with you, to get their voice in the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party, because of the way they're structured as organizations. The Democrats are far more top-down controlled than the GOP is. So there's more of a potential. Yeah. There's more of a potential of a grassroots, upswell within the GOP than there has been in the Democrats since the days of FDR. So you can forget that. So that's the only reason I'm even remotely sympathetic to a GOP takeover of the House.
Yeah.
Okay, because I can see the potential for populist elements to, undo this nonsense. So in Ukraine, this is an avoidable conflict that is now blown up, and is the Russians are done with the first phase of this, which is to pin down the bulk of the Ukrainian army in the Donbass and start wiping them out. And that's what's coming. That's what phase 2 is going to look like. They're not going to take very much territory other than the rest of the Donbass, and they're going to wipe out all the professional soldiers in the Ukrainian armed forces. That's what's coming if the Ukrainians don't surrender. And it's obvious that Zelensky's been told by Klaus Schwab not to surrender.
They're a giant bargaining chip at the moment.
And
are they fully encircled? Like, haven't some of them
under fire control? They are. I think the way the Saker and like MOA and other places, Moon, Alabama, and other places have put it, that the Russians have fire control across the entire cauldron, but they haven't actually encircled them with troops. But they don't have any weight. But
you mean artillery?
Yeah, under artillery fire and aircraft fire, meaning if they try to retreat, they can't.
Yeah.
And all the fuel depots behind them have already all been blown up. All the logistics points have all been blown up. So they can't even get the tanks out of there even if they wanted to. It's bad. They're going to get grounded to paste, and it's
not necessarily. They're going to be, well, depending on what
actually. Yeah. I think you're going to see a very sharp turn in the narrative. We're already seeing it.
Yeah.
Like Brett Stevens, of all people, today wrote a piece for the New York Times saying, "What if Putin didn't make a mistake in Ukraine?"
Really, because the last couple of days they've been like, there's this line going. Yeah,
that article came out. But Brett Stevens, who's really close to Neocon Central,
Because
now putting that out. That's a big deal.
Because just for people who don't know, like the last day or two, it's been another one of those intelligence, anonymous intelligence statements about how Putin's advisors gave him bad advice, and he's upset because he was poorly advised on this invasion. I don't know where they're going with that. Now you're saying
they're going with that Putin is that Putin is weak, and that's a possibility that there's going to be fractures, and therefore there's potential for regime change, and also that it's the narrative is that, oh look, the Russian military isn't as strong as we think it is.
Yeah, so we have to keep going. Yeah.
So we can keep going. We have an opportunity to keep going here. They really don't have any T-90 Armada tanks. They really don't have this. They really don't have any of this. That's the narrative they're seeding. I mean, they're dead. And to be honest with you, like you dig deep and they may be right. There's a nugget of truth there. Okay. That the Russian military may not have as much of the advanced weaponry that they've announced, that they could, that NATO couldn't, mount a counteroffensive at some point. But the Russians are being very cagey about how much territory they take, if you'll notice. See, we keep trying. Why don't you take the whole country? Well, if you take the whole country, then you outrun your supply lines. If you outrun your supply lines, a swift counterattack will take you out. So the Russians are being very cagey and saying, no, we're going to take this, consolidate, take this, consolidate, take this, consolidate. Oh, we're not really interested in Kiev. They were, but they failed. So now they're just going to hold it.
That was a distraction, I think.
It was a distraction, but there was a decapitation plan on there. There was a decapitation stretch goal. Right. Hey, well, maybe we could drop 2 IL-76s worth of Spetsnaz and, take out the Ukrainian government. But you got to take the Gostomel airport, and you didn't do it. So it didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that the basic structure of the strategy for Ukraine was to just move in and bind down Ukrainian army forces around Ukraine and make that a big feint. While the reality was that you were taking as much pressure off the guys in the Donbass as possible to keep numerical, because Ukraine has numerical advantage. I mean, it's like the Russians didn't attack with that many troops.
And the other thing about that is that the way they've been characterized, like the whole military, a bunch of Nazis on it, they're mostly conscript. These are kids from across the country, and it really, you put in the position of looking like you're defending Nazis, but the way that this whole country's been characterized is wrong.
But
at
the same time, and that's part of the Russians, effective propaganda.
Yeah, I'm not happy with the Russians right now, and I've been sympathetic to them for years now. I am not happy.
Well, you have to remember that in order for them to justify an aggressive invasion, this is the way they have to characterize it. This is about international law. This is about what happens afterwards. So while the goal was to wipe out the Banderists in the government and in the Ukrainian armed forces, which were centered in Mariupol and in Kiev.
That did not require an invasion.
No, it didn't. But that's not the only goal.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm with you.
Because the goal here was to show NATO, that's it. No more.
Yeah.
No mas. That's it. This is as far as we go. Now, again, I mean, it's a very complicated thing, and you can take one side or the other on it. I understand why they did it. I'm not saying that war is good. I don't like this, but if fight's coming, and that's the other thing. And I've made this argument before. The Russians have made it abundantly clear. Like, we have intelligence that said they were going to do a 2-day blitzkrieg at the Donbass on like the 27th of February. So we struck first and stopped them from doing it. If you know a fight's inevitable, go first.
Yeah.
And this is just the way things are.
All along, I thought that was probably, they were on the verge. I mean, there was troop buildup and all these things on both sides. So I think that is a reasonable explanation, but I don't think it explains everything. But I don't want to bog you down with that.
Sure.
Before we switch over to the bonus question, can I ask a little bit about, because the financial war is part of it's a ground
is really the most important part of this.
Yeah. So if you would, the whole issue of freezing the reserves, the Russian reserves,
Yes.
and
two angles on this.
And Putin and the Russian central bank and their leadership, I never quite understood. And then also now you have Putin and Lavrov making either speeches or statements saying, see, the EU and the US currencies are no longer trustworthy.
Yep.
Transition to a new whatever.
Bretton Woods.
So
a new Bretton Woods.
And then you have this Zoltan guy who I don't even know.
Yeah, Zoltan Pozar of Credit Suisse, who used to be an analyst over at the Fed.
So okay. Of these bits I just gave you, I don't really
I can do this.
No,
I can make this all work. It's very simple. That's not simple, but I can make it work. Okay. It's complicated, it's technical, it is what it is, but let's start with it. So part of the criticism of the Russians has been that the Russian central bank left $300 billion to be seized in overseas foreign markets. Now, what most people don't realize is that per WTO rules, you have to leave a lot of your, you have to leave a certain percentage of your trade that you earn in the country where you earned it in order to, facilitate the counter transfer, the spending it there, because you may turn around and spend it. So you have to leave your money around the world. Mm-hmm. They couldn't bring all $630 billion worth of foreign exchange home, right? $630 billion worth of foreign exchange home, the reserves home. They can't do it. They're not allowed. So they had to leave some overseas. The breakdown of it was that this is why the European banking system is such an interesting, and the Eurodollar market is such an interesting thing, because from the money that was seized, about $100 billion of it was actual cash. The other $200 billion of it was, interest rate swaps and whatnot, that because the Russians are a net creditor and a trade surplus nation, actually lent that dollar liquidity back to the European, to liquefy the European banking system. So the Russian trade balance, weirdly enough, was a positive, a net positive benefit to keeping the European banking system from collapsing. And they seized the money. And that money is no longer there for Intesa Sao Paulo or Santander or the Deutsche Bank or whoever to get access to overnight money. Like, this is a big deal, right? So that was, again, another Zoltan Pozar article previous to the new Bretton Woods article that he put out. He talked about this. He's like, this is going to be bad because you just seized this money that is a net positive inflow. So so someone's going to have to reliquify that market some way. Oh, by the way, the Bank of Japan just announced like massive QQE BBQ sauce, like QE to the moon because we need to. That's where the Kuroda, the good sat rap of the globalist, always does his job and by portraying the people of Japan. Okay. So liquefying the dollar markets that way, right? Because he's going to sell treasuries and do whatever he's going to do whatever he needs to do in order to make everybody happy. That's his job. Japan is the global patsy for the monetary system in that respect. Okay. So now you have that. And then there's there's been, why did you leave that much money out there? You knew they were going to seize it. Why did you do that? Well, two reasons. One, some of it they couldn't move because it was tied up in interest rate swaps, helping the European banks stay liquid, who they have big, extensive business with.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, you've got a central bank president who is very much IMF trained, who is very much an Atlanticist, and who has been browbeaten and brought into line by Putin in the past. People have to really understand Vladimir Putin because they don't. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Dmitry Medvedev was considered by Russians a traitor, an Atlanticist, Euro-integrationist. He is that no longer. He's probably more hardcore nationalist than Putin is, because Putin kept him around long enough to prove to him that he was wrong about the Europeans. In many ways, he's given Nabiulina that same rope to hang herself with over and over and over again. The goal is going to be for the Russians to nationalize their central bank so it's no longer in private hands. It is a Rothschild style, privately owned central bank in some way. It's not necessarily owned wholly by the Russian state. It's going to get nationalized. Okay. And how do you do that? Well, you leave $300 billion out to be stolen, and the central bank chairman didn't defend the ruble like she was supposed to. And she raised interest rates to 20% because she freaked out when she didn't need to, which she's always done in the past, which is to go way overboard with interest rate hikes. She has done this so many times, and she has fought Putin tooth and nail on interest rates. And by the way, Putin has a PhD in economics, people.
So you're saying that all of this justifies just
it justifies
reorganizing,
getting this institution, which he doesn't have complete control over. The Russian financial system is the thing he has the least control over. The flow of capital into and out of Russia was the one thing he's been working to finally shore up. And it's a hard process, people. You just don't pass a law and make it happen overnight. Okay.
I still don't completely understand why he doesn't have control over that.
It's because he didn't have any control over it when he took over, when he took office.
But wait, he's the all-powerful Oz in Russia, right? No,
he's not.
I know.
So everybody thinks he's like, oh, you just like pass a law and make it happen. No, you've got all this. This is a very difficult political situation here.
This is not a kingdom here where
this is, and even so, even the king is trapped by the people who are corrupt around him, and you've got to work assiduously to shore things up over time. It's just the way it is. Putin has survived multiple assassination attempts by oligarchs in the past.
Yeah, I believe that.
Openly admitted to Oliver Stone in the 4-hour Putin interviews.
Oh, I'll have to rewatch.
Go watch
that.
those.
I don't remember that.
Watch those. If you have not watched, they're on YouTube. Go find them. Oliver Stone's Putin interviews are absolutely necessity to understanding Vladimir Putin and Russia. And then you'll understand why they did what they did.
I will rewatch those.
And then listen to my podcast I did with Alistair Crook and even Joaquin Flores. But the Crook podcast I did to understand the language and the civilizational war aspect of this. And once you understand that, I personally will have even more sympathy for the Russians than you did before, because from their perspective, having gone deep into this, they had no other option. This was their option. You either fully attack Ukraine and decapitate it and atomize its ability to exist as a weapons platform for NATO, or you don't go in at all and you surrender the country. Those are your options. He did not have a third way out of this. I've argued this with my partner, Dexter White, multiple times in public and in private. And I'm telling you, I'm turning out to be right about this. I've been saying this for weeks now because I understand the situation, because I've been studying it from multiple angles for 10 years. This has been because I've always understood that Putin was the pivotal figure of the 21st century.
This is a great.
Because without Russia, there is no globalism.
I want to believe, but I don't completely, and I'm not quite sure that I'm not convinced yet. I'm not a.
So
I'm
I haven't so before we go any further, I got a couple of more things that I wanted to fully finish the
good,
because we still have to talk about the financial response. So foreign exchange reserves, big issue, right? Why did they allow that to happen? Okay, it's a talking point for the other side that thinks that Putin works for the WEF. I don't buy it. The other one is, the next one is gold for the pegging of the ruble to gold,
right? And
then demanding rubles for all exports.
Yeah.
Do you really think that that's globalism?
No.
It's the exact opposite.
But
it's the exact opposite of what Kissinger put in place in 73 with the petrodollar. It's the exact opposite.
But it could be a temporary war tactic too. So.
It is not a temporary tactic. He doesn't need, this is serious.
Mm-hmm.
He understands, Putin has made this abundantly clear in 100 speeches, that the Western financial system is extractive and wrong.
Yeah, well, we don't disagree with that.
So it's back to the gold standard. And now, how do you get back to the gold standard? You do that by first stabilizing the ruble by setting the price of gold underneath the market, meaning you put a floor under the price of gold. So when he did this last Friday, so we're doing this on March 31st, on the 25th of March, the most important day of the 21st century, done, period. Putin announced through the central bank that they would be buyers of gold at 5,000 rubles to the gram, which at the time is $1,500 and 50 an ounce gold. So 31 troy ounces, 155,500 rubles to the ounce at 100 rubles to the dollar. That's a 1550 gold price. Today, we're doing this 6 days later, and miraculously, the ruble is trading at like 83 or 84.
And today's the deadline too, right? Isn't today the deadline for buying
they
gas?
moved it after tomorrow. It's actually going to be Friday, or tomorrow or the next day or whatever. What matters here is that, okay, that's one thing. And so, why would he do that? Why wouldn't he raise it above the price of gold? Because he doesn't actually want to invoke the ire of anybody or break down the financial markets. What he wants to do in the first place is like, oh, by the way, I have this weapon. This weapon is going to be used to countermand your sanctions by stabilizing the ruble and bringing it back to pre-war levels, which is already 35% undervalued. The ruble should be trading in the 40s, for Christ's sake, at $120 a barrel oil. Okay, let's not even discuss this. The Russians run a $10 to $25 billion a month trade surplus.
Yeah.
And the ruble keeps depreciating versus the dollar.
Yes.
Because its sanctions are cutting off its flow around the world. Mm-hmm. That's it's an artificial constraint around its market. Mm-hmm. So now, but you do that to create a currency arbitrage for currency traders. Currency traders are looking at that going, the ruble's undervalued. I'm not selling those at 100 to the ounce. You need them. And then what do? You create demand for rubles by saying all of our exports have to be for unfriendly countries have to be bought in rubles.
Yeah.
Done. Now we'll bring that back into line. And now, once they're back in line, now Luke Roman and I were popularized this idea that if Putin really wanted to make the world submit, as opposed to paying for, saying that oil is 18 barrels to the ounce, which is the approximate price today, right? Divide the gold price by the barrel of oil price. It's about 18 barrels to the ounce of gold.
Yeah.
Say, no, it's 50. We'll sell it to you at a massive discount. That creates a massive run on physical gold because that implies like a $35 oil price. So you can go into the market and go buy physical gold and get 3.5 times the amount of oil that you could get from the Saudis or the Americans or anybody else. Of course, you're going to buy. And so what does that do? It creates a run on physical gold, which will collapse the LBMA and the COMEX. The paper gold system, which is the thing that liquefies the entire financial system on which all of Davos's power is based, collapses overnight if he does that. What do you think the response to that would be? I have the codes to plan R. Send the nukes to Moscow now.
Yeah, I was going to say, what other options are there?
Because with the part that most people, that even I didn't understand ultimately, is that we had two choices. Again, Luke Roman did an interview that went wild on Palisades Gold Radio about a week before I was on. And so those two interviews together really nail all this down for your listeners. Okay. And I absolutely implore you to listen to Luke talk about this.
I need to get that link from you. Okay.
It does. Palisades Gold Radio is on YouTube. Okay. You can find them. They're easy. The suits for Luke Roman, me, you'll find them. It's not hard. They're really, really simple. So now, Luke is the one who popularized. I said like 1,000 barrels to the ounce. I said 50. Like we don't even need to get dramatic here. What matters is that you create a new oil for gold standard.
Yeah.
Which changes the world because, as Luke said, like we had a choice. The choice was this: we want to expand the money supply to liquefy the world. Well, we had our choice. We could either allow the gold price of our reserves to rise commensurately with the amount of money that we're printing, or we could rehypothecate the gold that we have available and create rehypothecate, meaning we sell the same gold ounce 500 times.
Like fractional.
There's like 500 futures contracts that all point to this bar of gold.
Yeah.
That's called rehypothecation. It's like, and what happens is they write a futures contract in the COMEX, which then the LBMA buys and lays off against over in London, and then Chicago buys it back, and then London creates a new one, and they just keep doing this. And then GLD is involved as well. It's a very complicated thing. But at the end of the day, just understand that none of them actually hold that much physical gold. The LBMA doesn't have very much. The COMEX doesn't have very much. GLD has none, but they all reference the same pot of gold.
Yeah.
Which is this like small pile in a vault in Switzerland. And so think of gold as M0, as the base of Extra's pyramid, the base money of the world. All of this credit up here that we transact on a daily basis to buy, goods and shoes and washing machines and, pay for, subscriptions to Rockfin and Patreon or whatever, all that's all credit money. All that credit money, the valuation and your house, and all those debts that are indexed to SOFR or Libor and all that stuff, and the bank's balance sheets and all that stuff.
That pile of gold
comes down to this small pile of gold, which we have ballooned up to this size to allow for that system.
Oh my God.
So now you want to collapse that system? Make physical gold the price setter as opposed to the price taker in the gold market. Paper gold is theft. It's fraud. Just like a U.S. Treasury bond is fraud. Okay? And once you understand that, what else do you need to understand? Got gold or rubles. This is my new thing. That's the only hashtag I use anymore now. Hashtag got gold or rubles, because that is your mechanism. So now there's an interconvertibility between gold, the ruble, oil, copper, wheat, the yuan,
nickel,
the Saudi rial, which is going to depeg from the dollar. All of OPEC is going to go back to buying, is going to get on the gold scheme for this. And here's the big one. Now understand the arbitrage play. Here's how it works. I explained we sell it at a big deep discount of 50 barrels to the ounce. But what happens when we just have the ruble and gold? But the Russian trade balance is positive. So what's that going to do? Well, that's going to push up the value of the ruble relative to the dollar, right?
Yeah.
And that means that, hey, oil, Russian exports in gold are cheaper than buying them in rubles. So it's a nice price. And then that'll happen. And that's how the price of gold and the price of oil will go, and they'll all go up together. The ruble will strengthen, taking the price of gold up with it. And the price of oil will stay relatively the same. And you continue to put an upward pressure on the physical gold market at the same time. That collapses the COMEX and the LBMA's leverage. And that is the birth of a new monetary system. Davos wants nothing to do with this. Why do you think they've empowered the neocons like Blinken and Sullivan and Newland and Boris Johnson and the rest of them and Liz Truss to try to turn Putin into Hitler and attack him and destroy him in Ukraine? I'm sorry. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I see. That's what I see.
All right. Well, no, I'm glad that you went through that last part, especially because
it has to tie it all together.
Yeah. So bonus question, as
Sure.
we already started talking about this before we were recording. So, by the way, they have like 20 other questions here that have to be for another time. I'm scrolling down through the.
Joanne, just call me up and then we'll do this again another day. I'm happy to do.
I have all kinds of. Anyway, all right, I'm going to read this. So, just so I don't go off track. So there are people who have laid out some what I think are credible arguments or points that illustrate how Putin and Xi have a good relationship with Davos or had. How the measures they've taken at home, about COVID, almost indistinguishable from the West, right? And the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and the global governance factions have been working toward a new global currency too, or at least that's what they have said in their papers. New economic
system.
Yeah, infrastructure. And I'll add that the war in Ukraine is being used as an excuse for major economic failures and hardships for populations across the globe. And it shifts everyone's attention immediately from one major crisis to another.
Sure.
From COVID to this war. And oh my God, it's Putin's fault. Oh my God, it's the war. That's the reason why all this economic failure is happening, blah, blah, blah. Shortages. In other words, while they're framed as mortal enemies, it looks much more like they're really part of the same group of people who seek to fundamentally restructure the world economy and much more, as in create global technocracy.
Sure.
And this is a kind of thing that can only be set into motion by major catastrophic events like world wars, pandemics, economic collapse.
Agreed.
And so as I had mentioned to you before, one example of someone who has laid out this argument is Ian Davis over at Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout website. And I have an interview with him just a little while ago. And he says that, she and Putin have laid out their international rule, their replacement for their international rules-based order to I don't know what they call it, international law-based order, something like this. So I was going to read his quote there, but I think we both know the argument that he's making. And there are many, many valid points to it with long history. So how do we resolve these things? Because your argument is also very convincing. How do I resolve these two? Visit aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can gain access to the bonus content, join the Discord community, and participate in the periodic Zoom calls where we talk among ourselves. I hope that some of you will join us, and now we'll continue with the wrap-up. Come back soon, and let's keep talking about this.
Absolutely.
And I have to get in line because everybody wants an interview with you.
I'm trying to limit them at this point. I am, but I'm hoping that and at some point I'll slow down a little bit. But yeah, I'm happy to do this. For you, Joanne, you were like the first person who ever asked me to come on the show. Like you always have my time. If you ask, I will be here.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate that.
No matter what happens. So okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Tell everybody. Just real quick, go through how to find you, how to support you.
Sure. So the best way to find me is to go to my blog at tomluongo.me. You'll find the links to the podcast and all that stuff there. You'll find the link to the Patreon. What I do with the Patreon is a two-tiered system, really. $4 a month for the biweekly market reports, where you get to listen to me chatter about markets and stuff for 45 minutes, 35 to 45 minutes twice a week. And then 2 to 3 times a week, I also put out private blog posts for my patrons. Sometimes those become public blog posts as well, but they get updated. And then I'm always available along with a private Slack server for my community. And I have a community of about 800 people. And then once a month on top of that is the Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter, which gives you a portfolio strategy and all original content from both myself and my partner Dexter White, who hopefully will come on your show.
Yeah, hopefully you guys are going to get to meet him. Thank you again, Tom. Let's talk soon and take good care. Say hi to everybody for me.
I appreciate it, Joanne. You have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Tom Luongo. Follow Tom on Twitter at TFL1728. Find his work at the Gold, Goats, and Guns website, on YouTube, Odyssey, Patreon, and other platforms. This is a fully independent podcast. This is an age of censorship. Your support's more important than ever. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com, find the various ways you can get access to the bonus content and support the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave reviews. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire. Join us on Telegram, t.me/AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Hang in there. Stay strong.